and winding down an old familiar.
Bill Anderson, the most revered voice of country music, has been a popular Grand Ole Opry star for more than 6 decades. He is one of the nicest guys in country music, the kind of gentleman who always has a smile for a fan and a kind word for a fellow performer. However, even the kindest gentleman has his limits. Now, 87 years of age, Bill Anderson has named some of the Grand Ole Opry artists with whom he wasn't exactly on good terms. We're talking about alleged rivalries, rumored disagreements, and those little backstage clashes. Today, we're revealing 7 Grand Ole Opry artists who, according to Bill, might have found themselves on his personal hate list. Let's start with number 1, Porter Wagner. Porter Wagner was one Grand Ole Opry artist who was impossible to ignore the moment he entered a room. He was tall, sharp-featured, and always dressed in bright rhinestone suits. He was also known as Mr. Grand Ole Opry, and fans adored his theatrical presence and mournful ballads. He was a man with a big personality, and let's just say, sometimes that personality rubbed certain people the wrong way. Bill Anderson and Porter Wagner's paths crossed constantly during the golden era of the Opry. Both were top-tier acts, both had TV exposure, and both had fiercely loyal fan bases. The Opry back in those days wasn't just one big, happy family. The competition that went on within was evident. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew who was getting the better song slots, the bigger applause, and the prime TV time. Porter had a reputation for being controlling. On the Porter Wagner show, he played both the boss and the host, and had the final say on everything from set lists to camera angles. You had to play by his rules if you were a guest in his show, and if you didn't, you might find yourself mysteriously not invited back. Bill, on the other hand, was a songwriter's songwriter and a man who valued creative freedom. You can probably see that those two personalities might collide. Porter might have charmed the people, but Bill saw him differently. There's a story about their clash, and it floated around Opry hallways for decades. It was about a night when Bill was scheduled to perform right before Porter's segment. Bill had just released a new song he was proud of, and he planned to give it the complete 3-minute treatment. But Porter, running the clock tight for his big finale, allegedly leaned over to the stage manager and said, "Cut him to 2 verses." Now, whether that happened exactly that way or not, it fed a long-standing feud between the two. Porter was always looking out for Porter, and Bill, though nice, didn't forget things like that easily. The tension wasn't open warfare. You'd never see Bill and Porter screaming in the hallway or throwing guitars. They were both too professional for that. It was, however, noticed that Bill rarely appeared on Porter's TV show, and Porter seldom cut songs written by Bill, despite Anderson being one of Nashville's most successful songwriters. It was weird because, during that time, each other's material was a common courtesy. Porter was also known for giving backhanded advice, the kind that sounded friendly but came with a little sting. He once supposedly told a younger Opry artist, right in front of Bill, that his song is all right, but it ain't Still. And mind you, Still was one of Bill Anderson's biggest hits. Depending on how you hear it, that's either a compliment or a bit of a jab. And then there was the Dolly Parton factor. Dolly Parton joined Wagner's show in 1967, and they became a popular duet act, releasing several albums together. After years of a successful partnership on the Porter Wagner show, Parton decided to leave in 1974 to pursue a solo career. This decision led to a dispute, and in 1979, Wagner sued Parton for $3 million, alleging breach of contract. Bill had known Dolly since the early days, and he admired her songwriting. So when Dolly's partnership with Porter famously imploded, Bill stayed friendly with her. In the world of country music, where gossip was the trend, picking a side, even quietly, could put a little strain on other relationships. By the 1980s, both men were riding the waves in the industry. Porter kept hosting his show, and Bill kept writing and performing. They put their differences aside and coexisted just fine on Opry nights. But when Bill is asked off stage who he seems to keep at arm's length, Porter's name would come up with a knowing smile. But Bill has never outrightly trashed Porter in interviews. That's not his way. But if you listen closely, you'll catch those sly little pauses when Porter's name comes up. He might say, "Porter was quite a character," or "Porter knew what he wanted." That's just a polite way of saying we didn't always see eye to eye. Little Jimmy Dickens. The next artist on Bill's list is Little Jimmy Dickens. Now, you might be surprised that he's had a clash with Little Jimmy Dickens, The man was barely 5 feet tall and sweet as a slice of pecan pie. How could anyone not adore him? Well, that's the thing about the music industry. Even the most charming performers can be harsh if you hang around long enough. Little Jimmy Dickens became a member of the Grand Ole Opry in 1948, so he was already a veteran by the time Bill Anderson made his way to that stage in the early 60s. Dickens was funny, quick-witted, and he had a knack for stealing the spotlight without even trying. That last part is where the quiet tension started between him and Bill. You see, Bill Anderson's style of singing was unique. They didn't call him Whisperin' Bill for nothing. He sang in a smooth, soft-spoken voice, like he was having a conversation. But Dickens's delivery style was opposite. He sang wild novelty songs with comedic bits that could get the crowd roaring before he even sang a note. The contrast was always dramatic on nights when both men performed in the same event. There's a story from the early 1970s about a Saturday night when Bill was debuting a heartfelt ballad he'd spent months perfecting. Dickens had just finished a raucous comedy routine that had the crowd laughing so hard they were wiping tears, and Bill was the next artist in the lineup to perform. Even when Bill stepped on stage, the applause and laughter did not stop. It rolled right up to his first line. Bill later communicated his frustration in private and said it felt as if he was singing to an empty room. Some Opry insiders say Bill didn't find what happened that night funny at all. Now, it is hard to say if Dickens was deliberately upstaging Bill. Jimmy was famous for staying on stage past his performance time, and most times, the stage manager had to wave him off. The Opry is a delicate balancing act, and if you run too long, you cut into the next performer's slot. And if the next performer is a man who values precision and pacing like Bill Anderson, well, you can see where the tension might creep in. Dickens also had the habit of playfully teasing people. He had nicknames for everyone, and sometimes those nicknames weren't flattering. Bill supposedly used to say, "Here comes Whispering Bill, turn up your hearing aids." Bill would smile, but deep down, he hated the teasing. Another reason for their disputes was the song choices. On more than one occasion, Dickens reportedly asked to swap set orders at the last minute because he thought the crowd needed an energy boost. That meant his upbeat numbers would sometimes come right before Bill's quieter, reflective ones. Bill accuses Dickens of always trying to be the loudest act in the first half of the show. Whether intentional or not, that very habit always left Bill with a more challenging job winning the audience's focus back. But despite their supposed friction, the two men shared tour buses during shows in the 60s. They had moments of irritation along the way, and they tried to stay out of each other's way as much as they could. But if you caught Bill in a candid mood, he'd admit Jimmy's antics could be exhausting. Faron Young. Bill Anderson didn't like Faron Young either. This was because Faron had a weird personality. He was a man who could light up a room in one moment and start an argument in the same 10 minutes. From the early 1950s through the mid-1970s, Faron Young ranked among the top stars and most colorful personalities of country music. But he was also one of country music's most infamous hellraisers. He lived a life characterized by episodes of violence and arrogance. Stories of his drinking, fighting, and female trouble are legendary. Faron was partly a singer, a showman, and a troublemaker, depending on who you ask. Faron had already established his name in country music when Bill Anderson arrived at the Grand Ole Opry in 1961. He had the hits, the swagger, and the kind of confidence that could border on arrogance. Bill, on the other hand, was the polite, soft-spoken new artist in Nashville. You'd think they'd get along just fine. But people in the Opry were full of ego, and personalities didn't always blend. Faron had a reputation for making jokes about sensitive things. He loved to tease his fellow performers, sometimes in a way that set the target up for mockery. Bill valued respect above all, so he didn't always appreciate Faron's style of humor. In one of such incidents, Faron joked into the microphone during a rehearsal and said that Bill's songs were so slow you could sleep between verses. Everyone in the room laughed, but Bill reportedly kept his head down, finished his number, and left the stage without a word. To add to this, Faron was a big believer in entertainment first, music second. He'd change tempos, throw in wild ad-libs, or dance around the stage just to get a reaction. Bill, on the other hand, who took music as a priority, treated the Opry stage like a sacred place, a space where the music came first and gimmicks came last. Because of the difference in philosophy, Bill was always annoyed at Faron whenever he turned the stage into a circus and made the crowd howl. Faron's reckless lifestyle and his love for trouble were other reasons Bill never liked him. He was known for staying up late, partying, and occasionally getting into trouble with the authorities. This doesn't mean that Bill was a saint. He just kept his head in the game and ensured to maintain a clean image. More than once, Bill reportedly arrived for a Saturday night show to find Faron in the dressing room with a drink in one hand and a cigar in the other. In a story so outrageous, it was hard to tell where the truth ended and the bragging began. It's not that Bill didn't have a sense of humor. He's one of the storytellers in country music, but his humor was mature and perfectly timed. Faron was the opposite, and he was loud and sometimes reckless. That is why both of them often get into misunderstandings. One of the rumors is that Bill and Faron ended up in a heated argument over the set order during one of the tours. Faron wanted to close the show with his upbeat hits as the perfect finale, but Bill, backed by the promoter, insisted that his ballads would send audiences home on an emotional high. Faron eventually got the last slot and supposedly performed for nearly 40 minutes, forcing Bill to shorten his own set earlier in the night. Depending on who you ask, Bill considers Faron Young one of the most frustrating artists he's met in the Opry, Jeannie Seely. Now, here's a name that might surprise some folks: Jeannie Seely. Her husky voice, sharp wit, and fearless stage presence earned her the nickname Miss Country Soul. Jeannie joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1967, and she appeared more times on the program than any other performer. She was confident, she was outspoken, and she could stand toe-to-toe with any man on that stage. This, of course, meant she occasionally got into rivalry with the Opry's other prominent personalities, including Whisper and Bill. From the outside, Bill and Jeannie have a lot in common. They were two seasoned professionals who had been in the music scene for decades, had plenty of hit songs, and loved performing on the Opry stage. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find out that they had differences, which sometimes led to a little backstage clash between them. The most prominent reason for this is that Jeannie had a big personality. For starters, she was someone who had no problem speaking her mind, whether it was about set lists, dress codes, or the Opry's sometimes rigid traditions. Bill was more of a traditionalist who believed that certain formality and decorum should be maintained while on stage. But Jeannie was fond of going out of order and doing things her way, and when queried, she would challenge the authority of producers. She loved attention and would go out of her way to get it, even if it meant disrespecting others in the process. Since she was one of the few females in the male-dominated field, she felt that not submitting to their rules was a way to survive in the industry. This is what irks Bill about her. Bill remembers a particular incident that fueled a contention between them. This came from the way Jeannie handled introductions. Bill, being a storyteller, liked to set up his songs with a slow, thoughtful lead-in, but Jeannie preferred to keep things snappy, and sometimes she ends up skipping the setup entirely. On nights when they followed each other in the lineup, that difference in pacing could feel jarring. On one of those nights in the Opry, Bill had just finished performing a soulful song, and the crowd was still sitting in that quiet, emotional moment. But when Jeannie came on stage, she said, "Well, enough of that sad stuff. Let's have some fun." The audience laughed, but that statement hurt Bill because he didn't love having his emotional punchlines stepped on. Jeannie also joined the other Opry members to tease Bill because of his voice. And sometimes, those jokes cut a little too close. In one radio interview, she teased Bill about his whisper singing style, saying, "I keep waiting for him to shout one day, so that I know he's awake up there." Bill chuckled on air, but insiders say he mentioned the comment more than once afterward. He never asked for an apology. He never retaliated. He just decided to distance himself from her and close the door to possible friendship. Hank Snow. Now here's a man who could walk into a room and make every head turn because of his fame. But surprisingly, Bill Anderson doesn't seem to like him much. If you've ever seen old Opry footage of Hank Snow, you'll know the man was the very definition of legend. He was a superstar with decades of hits behind him long before Bill Anderson ever set foot on the Opry stage. But here's the thing about some of these legends. They don't always make the easiest coworkers, especially when the spotlight is involved. Hank was known for being a perfectionist. He was meticulous about his music, his appearance, and even the way the microphone was adjusted. Bill loved professionalism, but it seemed Hank's version of it sometimes tipped into obsession and control, and that could rub a fellow performer the wrong way. One typical story every member of the Opry has told about Hank is that he had a no surprises rule. If you were on the same show as him, he expected you to stick to the script. There has to be no changing of the set list at the last minute, no extending your song by an extra verse, and no borrowing one of his signature styles. Bill, being a songwriter, was used to making spontaneous changes to his script and could easily change his mind about what to sing. The two approaches didn't always blend, and because of that, he and Hank didn't get along well. Bill makes mention of an Opry night in the late 60s when he and Hank had a dispute. He had just written a new song and decided to debut it, even though it hadn't been cleared with the producers. Hank was in the studio that day, and he followed him on the lineup. He allegedly turned to the stage manager and said that if Anderson could ignore the schedule, he would do the same. Hank then went on stage and played an extended medley that ran several minutes past his stipulated time and indirectly cut short the studio time of the next artist. It might have been a petty revenge or just Hank being Hank, but it didn't exactly warm the friendship between the two men. Hank was also very commanding on stage, and sometimes he showcased this habit even when he wasn't on it. According to Opry tradition, an artist is expected to hang around in the wings to watch his fellow performers and clap along or smile in support. Hank, however, sometimes preferred to make a grand entrance halfway through when someone else was performing on stage. He just strolls backstage in full view of the audience. Many people said that it was unintentional, while some said that he did it out of pride. He was so fond of trying to steal the spotlight and was quick to remind everyone who the real star was if he got questioned. Bill, ever the gentleman, hated such behavior and so started disliking him. There is also a significant difference when it comes to music performance. Bill sings ballads and narrative songs, but Hank's performances were polished showpieces designed to impress from the first note. That contrast could work in the right setting, but if they shared a stage, Bill's soft delivery would get overshadowed by Hank's commanding presence. So Bill just kept his distance from him. Their personalities didn't align. Hank Snow appeared unapproachable and unfriendly. He kept his distance from other members, and Bill felt he was just being rude. When asked about Hank in an interview, Bill spoke warmly of his contributions to country music, noting that his influence on the Opry was immeasurable. But in between those compliments, he pauses, the kind of pause that says, "We didn't get along." Webb Pierce. Webb Pierce was considered one of country music's biggest stars in the 50s and 60s. He lived a flamboyant lifestyle and had many decorated cars. If you know Webb Pierce, you must have known about his Cadillac adorned with silver dollars and a gun-handled gear shift. Flashy didn't even begin to cover it. He frequently brought this car, along with others, to the Grand Ole Opry, so it was a common sight. His success gave him confidence, and what some might call swagger, but that didn't always blend smoothly with everyone else's personality, including Bill Anderson's. When Bill joined the Opry in the early 60s, Webb had already made it big with a string of massive hits. He had the record sales, the wardrobe, the money, and a reputation for being unapologetically flamboyant. Bill, on the other hand, built his career on understated charm and a deep respect for tradition. That contrast was bound to create a little friction. One thing Webb was known for, besides his top charting hits, was his competitive streak. In those days, the Opry wasn't just a performance, it was more like a showcase. Every artist always tried to win over the crowd and maybe get a little more buzz than the previous performance. Webb was well aware of these dynamics, and he played it to his advantage. He'd turn up the tempo, extend a chorus, or add an unexpected high note if he thought it would get the audience cheering louder than they had for the last performer. For a man like Bill, who valued pacing and subtlety, that kind of "I'm here to outshine you" approach could feel like stepping on toes. On one of those days, Bill was performing in the Opry, and he had the audience right in the palm of his hand, hanging on every word of the sweet, soulful ballad he was singing. When he finished performing, there was a big applause from the audience, but as the applause died down, Webb strutted on stage and said, "All right, folks, enough of that soft stuff. Let's wake up this place." The crowd roared, but backstage, Bill reportedly just shook his head. It's not as if Bill didn't appreciate an energetic set, but he just wasn't a fan of having his own carefully built mood wiped away in a single sentence. Bill also didn't like how he flaunted the flamboyant lifestyle. Webb loved flashy things: rhinestones, custom boots, big cars, and even bigger publicity stunts. Bill's brand was built on authenticity and the craft of songwriting. While both approaches worked for their respective careers, their lifestyles were so different that they could not have come close without personality clashes. It didn't help that Webb was a businessman as much as he was a performer. He was always negotiating aggressively for prime spots on the Opry lineup, and there were whispers that he'd occasionally trade favors with promoters to secure better billing. Bill didn't act in that way. He believed the music should speak for itself. This is why Bill never took a liking to him. One of the more famous incidents of rivalry between Webb and Hill was when he showed up at the Opry in that flashy Cadillac just as Bill was walking in. Webb honked the horn, waved Bill over, and said, "One day you'll write a song big enough to buy one of these." Bill's polite reply, "I'll stick to a car that gets me to work on time." That night, something shifted permanently in how Bill navigated the industry. Being mocked for softness, especially by someone in the same sector, felt like a betrayal. Bill says he only told close friends about what happened because he didn't want the industry to turn it into a feud. By the time Webb's Opry appearances became less frequent in the 70s, the backstage tension between the two had reduced. Bill never took public shots at Webb, but in interviews, when asked about the artists in Opry that he didn't like, he mentioned Webb Pierce, Skeeter Davis. If you've ever heard The End of the World, you know Skeeter Davis had one of the most distinctive voices in country music history. She was one of the first female vocalists to become a top-level star in the country music field. Her voice was soft, emotional, and a little haunting. She was the kind of singer who could make you feel like she was telling your story, and she wasn't afraid to bend the rules to do it. But in the music industry, that willingness to push boundaries didn't always appeal to her fans, and Bill Anderson reportedly states that he is among those who found Skeeter a little too unpredictable for comfort. Bill and Skeeter crossed paths at the Opry in the 1960s when they were both rising stars. Bill was topping the charts with his poetic ballads, while Skeeter was enjoying crossover success that drew in pop audiences. They had plenty in common as musicians. They were both passionate about their craft, loved connecting with fans, and had a deep respect for the stage. But outside music, it was a different story. Skeeter was an outspoken woman who loved to speak out when she felt something was unfair or outdated. On various occasions, she has called out management decisions, pushed for more creative freedom, and wasn't shy about voicing opinions on how women were treated in the industry. Bill didn't dislike her because she was outspoken, but rather, he disliked her for being disrespectful when trying to prove a point. Bill mentions a situation where Skeeter reportedly criticized the way the show's lineup was being handled, right there in the dressing room, with other artists and staff present. That was disrespectful to the producers. Bill, who was in the room, supposedly gave her a polite smile and said, "Some things are better said in private." It wasn't that he disagreed with her entirely, he just didn't like the way she went about it. Skeeter also has a flair for being unpredictable on stage. She might change a song's arrangement at the last minute, invite an unexpected guest to sing with her, or extend a set if the crowd was loving it. While the audience often adored these surprises, it could throw off the tightly timed Opry schedule. And for a man like Bill, who valued preparation and flow, those kinds of curveballs weren't always welcome, especially if they pushed his slot back or shortened his set. There's an incident about a Christmas show where Skeeter, without warning, invited Bill up mid-set to sing harmony on Silver Bells. Bill, caught off guard but ever the professional, joined her. The moment was warm, sweet, and the crowd loved it. But as soon as they walked off stage, Bill reportedly told her to give him a little heads up next time, so he isn't caught off guard. Still, Skeeter wasn't trying to make enemies. She was trying to create moments. She loved her fans deeply, and she wasn't about to let a clock or a tradition stop her from delivering a performance that felt right. But to Bill, there was a fine line between showmanship and showing off, and sometimes, in his view, she crossed it. One of the most talked about moments in Skeeter's career was when she was suspended from the Opry in 1973 for speaking out about what she felt was injustice in the Nashville police force. Bill, a man who chose his public battles very carefully, likely saw this as an avoidable blow to her career. While he never spoke harshly of her in interviews, his cautious nature and her firebrand personality were always going to be an odd mix. In the end, Skeeter Davis was one of those artists who lived entirely on her terms. She was bold, creative, sometimes frustrating, but always unforgettable. And while Bill Anderson may have preferred a steadier, more predictable path, he couldn't deny the spark she brought to the Opry stage. Their differences weren't just personal, they were symbolic of a bigger shift in country music, from the buttoned-up traditions of the past to the free-spirited performances that would shape the genre's future. Years later, when reflecting on his different experiences with these artists in the Grand Ole Opry, Bill sums it up in one quiet sentence. Not everyone had to be close friends, but they did respect each other's artistry. So now it's over to you. Which of these names surprised you most? Do you think Bill was right to keep his distance from some of these names, or were they just misunderstood in the whirlwind of showbiz? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that like button, Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Before you go, check out the video showing on your screen now.